The hospital's automatic doors slid open, but it wasn't a person who entered. It was a small, drenched puppy, shivering and limping across the spotless floor, a black bag clenched tightly in his teeth. Nurses froze. Patients stared. The puppy's eyes were wild with desperation as he barked once, then dropped the bag at a doctor's feet before collapsing in exhaustion. For a moment, silence filled the lobby, until a faint sound came from inside the bag. A weak, trembling cry. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Dr. Emily knelt to open it, her hands shaking. What she found inside would change everyone's life forever, and prove that even the tiniest creature can carry the greatest act of love. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The sun had barely climbed over the hospital's glass facade when the automatic doors of St. Mary's slid open with a soft hiss. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of disinfectant and coffee from the nurses' lounge. It was supposed to be an ordinary day, until a tiny golden puppy limped across the spotless tiles. His fur was matted with dirt, his paws trembling slightly as he dragged something behind him. A small, worn-out black bag clutched tightly between his teeth. For a brief moment, no one moved. The receptionist froze mid-sentence, the janitor stopped his mop in mid-stroke, and a nurse near the entrance gasped. "Is that a dog?" someone whispered, but it wasn't the sight of the puppy that drew their attention. It was the urgency in his movements, the panic in his eyes, as if he was carrying a message the world needed to hear. The puppy stopped in the center of the lobby, panting hard. His tail was tucked, his ears lowered, and yet there was determination in every shaky step. He looked around, scanning the sea of confused faces, and let out a small, pitiful whimper before nudging the black bag toward a group of nurses. The sound echoed through the silent corridor, soft but desperate. A nurse named Clara hesitated before stepping forward. "Hey, little one," she murmured, kneeling down slowly. "What do you have there?" The puppy barked once, sharp and pleading, then nudged the bag again as if urging her to open it. The other nurses exchanged worried glances. "Did someone send him here? Maybe it's a lost pet. Where did that bag come from?" The questions overlapped, but the puppy's focus never wavered. His chest heaved, his breathing shallow, his gaze locked on the bag like it contained something far more important than anyone realized. Clara reached for the zipper but stopped halfway. There was a faint sound like a soft sigh coming from inside. Her heart skipped a beat. She looked up at her colleagues, eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. The lobby fell silent again. The puppy whimpered once more, eyes glistening. Whatever was inside that black bag was alive, and it needed help, fast. Clara's hands trembled as she slowly unzipped the worn black bag. The faint whimpering inside grew louder, fragile and uneven, like the sound of a small creature struggling for air. Her pulse quickened. Around her, a small crowd of nurses and hospital staff gathered, drawn by the strange, urgent scene unfolding before them. The puppy stood motionless now, eyes fixed on Clara, tail barely twitching as if afraid that any sudden move might make things worse. Inside the bag, nestled among torn bits of fabric and an old towel, was a tiny shape, barely moving. Clara leaned closer but couldn't see clearly through the shadows. "It's something alive," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But I can't tell what." A young orderly stepped forward hesitantly. "Should we call security?" he asked. Another nurse shook her head. "No, call pediatrics, whatever that is, it sounds like a baby." The words hit like thunder. Several people gasped, and the puppy barked once, a short, sharp sound that made Clara flinch. The receptionist reached for the phone. "Dr. Emily Hayes, pediatric unit. Tell her to come immediately." The message spread quickly through the hospital halls, the kind that makes everyone pause mid-step. Meanwhile, Clara lifted the edge of the towel just enough to glimpse a flash of pale skin. Her breath caught in her throat. "Oh my God," she whispered, covering her mouth. "It's a baby." The crowd erupted in whispers. A baby inside that bag? Who would do such a thing? And how did the dog know to bring it here? The questions flooded the air, but the puppy only whimpered again, taking a small step forward, pressing his paw gently against the nurse's shoe as if begging her to hurry. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. She looked at the frightened little dog, then at the tiny bundle in her hands. "Don't worry," she whispered softly. "We'll help. I promise." But as she turned toward the hallway, she felt the weight of the mystery settle in her chest. Who was this baby? And what desperate story had led a puppy to carry it into a hospital seeking help? The doors to the pediatric wing swung open with a soft whoosh, and Dr. Emily Hayes stepped out, her lab coat swaying slightly as she hurried toward the commotion. She was known throughout St. Mary's not only for her skill but for her calm heart, a doctor who treated every child like her own. But nothing could have prepared her for what she saw that morning. A trembling golden puppy standing protectively beside a nurse clutching a black bag, and the unmistakable sound of an infant's faint cry echoing through the lobby. "What's going on here?" Emily asked, moving closer. The moment she saw the contents of the bag, her expression changed from confusion to urgency. "Clear the area," she ordered sharply. The nurses instinctively stepped back, making room as she knelt beside Clara. "How long has it been crying like this?" I don't know," Clara stammered. "He just brought it here." She gestured to the puppy, who let out a soft bark, tail tucked but eyes locked on Emily as if pleading for her to act quickly. Emily reached into the bag, her hands steady but her heartbeat racing. She gently lifted the small, fragile body into her arms. The baby's skin was cold, its breathing shallow, lips tinged with blue. "Get a warming blanket and an oxygen mask," she called out. Now, the nurses sprang into action. Emily pressed 2 fingers to the baby's neck, feeling for a pulse. It was there, but faint. She looked down at the puppy, who was watching every move, his head tilted, whimpering softly. "You did good," she whispered under her breath. "You brought this baby just in time." As the nurses returned with equipment, Emily turned and strode toward the emergency room doors. The puppy tried to follow, nails clicking on the polished floor, but a guard stepped in his way. He barked anxiously, desperate to stay close. Emily paused and looked back, her voice soft but firm. "Let him come," she said. "He's part of this, and together," the doctor and the loyal little dog disappeared into the bright hospital corridor, toward a fight that would test every ounce of hope they had left. The emergency ward doors burst open as Dr. Emily carried the fragile newborn in her arms. Nurses rushed alongside her, their shoes squeaking against the polished tiles, while the golden puppy trotted anxiously behind, refusing to be left out of sight. The baby's faint cries pierced the air, weak but desperate, the sound of life clinging to the thinnest thread. Warm blankets, oxygen. "Now," Emily commanded, her voice cutting through the tension. A nurse quickly adjusted the small oxygen mask over the baby's face as another gently rubbed its tiny limbs to restore circulation. The monitors flickered to life, showing erratic heartbeats that made everyone's chest tighten. The puppy stopped near the doorway, panting, his eyes never leaving the infant. He pressed his paws against the glass partition, whining softly. Even through the chaos, his gaze seemed to carry a plea. "Don't give up on her." Emily examined the child carefully. "She's malnourished, dehydrated, and she's been out here for hours," she muttered. Her eyes caught something unusual. Faint red marks on the baby's wrist and a strip of torn cloth still clutched in her tiny hand. She must have been wrapped up and left somewhere cold. The thought made her throat tighten. A nurse gasped. "Doctor, look at this." She pointed to the inside of the black bag, a small corner stained with dried blood and a scrap of paper barely visible beneath the lining. Emily reached for it, carefully unfolding the damp note. It was smeared and half torn, but 3 words stood out clearly. "Please, save her." The room fell silent. Even the monitor seemed to pause for a second. Emily looked down at the newborn, her heart aching. Whoever left this baby must have been desperate, yet trusted that somehow help would come. She turned toward the golden puppy, whose tail gave a single hopeful wag. "You didn't just bring a bag," she whispered softly. "You brought us a miracle." The beeping of the monitors echoed through the sterile room, each sound a haunting reminder of how fragile the baby's life had become. Dr. Emily's brow glistened with sweat as she worked, her gloved hands moving quickly and precisely. Her heart rates dropping again. One of the nurses shouted. Emily's eyes darted to the monitor. The numbers were falling fast. "Get me more oxygen and start warming her core temperature," she ordered, voice tense but controlled. The newborn's tiny chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. Every second mattered. Emily pressed her stethoscope against the baby's chest, listening for strength where there was only weakness. "Come on, sweetheart," she murmured. "Stay with me." Outside the glass window, the puppy sat on the cold floor, staring through the barrier with wide, frightened eyes. His ears were pinned back, his body trembling with quiet whimpers. Each time the monitor's tone changed, he let out a soft bark, as if urging the people inside not to give up. "Heart rate still unstable," a nurse reported. Emily clenched her jaw. "We're not losing her now," she said firmly. She reached into the incubator, gently massaging the baby's chest with rhythmic motions to stimulate her heart. "Increase room temperature and keep the fluid steady." Minutes passed like hours. The tension in the room was suffocating. Every nurse moved in perfect synchronization, but beneath their calm exterior, fear hung heavy. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears, yet she refused to step back. Then a faint sound. The baby let out a weak, trembling cry. Everyone froze for a second, their eyes snapping toward the tiny figure. "We've got a response," a nurse shouted. Emily exhaled shakily, her shoulders slumping in relief. Through the window, the puppy barked joyfully, tail wagging for the first time since he'd entered the hospital. Emily glanced at him with a soft smile and whispered, "You were right to bring her here." But deep down, she knew this battle wasn't outside the ICU. The little golden puppy paced restlessly, his claws clicking softly against the hospital tiles. Every few seconds he would stop, perk his ears toward the door and whine, a trembling sound that echoed through the sterile hallway. Nurses passing by tried to calm him, offering bits of food and gentle words, but he refused everything. His gaze stayed fixed on that one door, the one behind which his tiny companion fought for her life. Inside, Dr. Emily and her team were still battling exhaustion and time. The baby's oxygen levels dipped again, her fragile heartbeat faltering on the monitor. Emily's voice trembled as she called out, "Increase the oxygen flow, don't let her fade." Sweat rolled down her temples as she gently tapped the baby's foot, hoping for movement. Nothing. The room grew heavy with silence. Then, from outside, a desperate bark broke through the quiet. It wasn't loud, but it carried raw emotion, an unspoken cry for hope. Everyone looked up. Through the glass they saw the puppy pawing frantically at the window, eyes wide and glistening. He barked again, louder this time, as if pleading with them not to stop fighting. Emily froze, her heart twisting. Somehow his cries pierced the exhaustion in the room, reigniting the spark of determination that was fading among the staff. She looked at the baby again. "You hear that?" she whispered softly. "He's not giving up on you, and neither will we." She refocused, adjusting the baby's airway, performing gentle compressions while another nurse stabilized the IV line. The monitor flickered once, then again, before the faint rhythmic beeping resumed. A collective sigh filled the room. The tension eased slightly, and Emily smiled through the tears brimming in her eyes. "Good girl," she whispered to the baby. Then she turned toward the glass window, meeting the puppy's gaze. He had stopped barking now, tail wagging weakly, ears lowered in relief. Emily whispered under her breath, "You knew. You somehow knew." In that moment, everyone in the room realized it wasn't just instinct. The little dog outside that door had felt every beat of the baby's fragile heart as if it were his own. For what felt like an eternity, the world inside the ICU moved in slow motion. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound anyone dared to breathe to. Then, a miracle. The baby's tiny chest began to rise and fall with steady rhythm. Her color returned, a soft pink blooming across her once pale skin. The faint, fragile cry that escaped her lips was the most beautiful sound Emily had ever heard. "She's stabilizing," whispered a nurse, her voice trembling with relief. Emily leaned closer, watching the baby's heartbeat dance evenly across the screen. The chaos of the past hour melted into a still hush, the kind that comes after surviving a storm. Outside the glass wall, the little puppy pressed his nose against the window, tail wagging gently. His eyes were still wet, but now they gleamed with something pure, hope. The staff who had gathered couldn't help but smile. The janitor wiped a tear from his cheek. "He must have known she'd make it," he said softly. Emily nodded, still focused on the baby. "Sometimes," she murmured, "animals sense what we can't." She wrapped the baby in a clean, warm blanket and whispered, "You're safe now, sweetheart." The puppy tilted his head, watching as Emily gently placed the baby into an incubator for observation. For the first time since he entered the hospital, his trembling stopped. He sat down quietly, his breathing slowing, as if his tiny body finally allowed itself to rest. Emily turned toward him through the glass, her eyes soft with gratitude. "You did good, little one," she said with a faint smile. In that moment, it wasn't just a rescue, it was a silent bond between two souls who had fought for the same fragile life and won. The baby's breathing was steady now, the monitors calm and rhythmic. Relief had washed over the room, but for Dr. Emily, questions had begun to swirl like storm clouds. Who was this child? And how had a stray puppy known to bring her here? A few hours later, 2 police officers arrived at St. Mary's after the hospital reported the unusual case. One of them, Officer Mark Davis, examined the small black bag placed on a metal tray beside the incubator. "No ID, no fingerprints, no camera footage near the entrance," he murmured. Whoever left her wanted to disappear. The golden puppy sat quietly at Emily's feet, his fur still damp from the morning rain. When Mark leaned in to take the bag, the pup let out a low growl, protective and wary. Emily smiled softly, resting her hand on the puppy's head. "Easy, boy. He's just helping." Mark raised an eyebrow. "This little guy dragged the baby all the way here?" Emily nodded. Alone, through the streets. He didn't stop until he reached the hospital doors. Mark knelt beside the puppy, studying the dirt on his paws and the faint red line from the strap he had carried. "No collar, no tag, no chip," he noted. "It's like he came out of nowhere," Emily sighed. "Maybe fate brought him." The officer gave a half smile. "Or someone trained him. But who and why?" As Mark filled out his report, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this dog wasn't just a random stray. He'd acted with purpose, like he knew what was inside that bag. When night fell, the hospital quieted. The baby slept peacefully, her tiny hand curled around a blanket. Nearby, the puppy lay beneath her crib, eyes half closed but alert, as if guarding her from the world. Outside, rain tapped gently against the window. Somewhere out there, Emily thought, the missing piece of this mystery waited, and the little hero at her feet might be the only one who could lead them to it. The next morning, the hospital buzzed quietly under soft golden light filtering through the blinds. Dr. Emily sat in her office, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside her. The baby was safe for now, but the unanswered question weighed on everyone's mind. Who was her mother, and why did she trust a puppy to save her child? Officer Mark walked in, holding a small plastic evidence bag. Inside it was the damp scrap of paper found in the black bag. "We managed to dry it out," he said, placing it gently on her desk. The note was smudged but readable now, short, trembling handwriting that made Emily's chest tighten. "Please, save my baby. I can't." Emily traced the words with her eyes, imagining the trembling hands that wrote them. She must have been terrified, she murmured. "But why leave the baby with a dog?" Mark sighed. "That's what we're trying to figure out. We've checked nearby CCTV footage, but the angles are bad. The only thing we saw was this little guy." He gestured to the puppy sleeping by Emily's desk. "Running through the street, dragging the bag with his teeth. He crossed 2 intersections, nearly got hit by a car before finding this hospital." Emily's gaze softened. "He must have followed his instincts. Maybe he came from wherever she was." Mark nodded. "We'll send officers around the area the cameras caught him from. Maybe she's still nearby." As he left, Emily bent down to pet the puppy. His eyes fluttered open, sleepy but alert, as if he'd been listening all along. "You carried her through the storm," she whispered. "Now help us find her." The puppy licked her fingers softly, tail giving a faint wag. Emily smiled sadly. Deep down she felt it. This little hero wasn't finished yet. Somewhere out there the baby's mother was waiting, praying that her desperate act of love had reached the right hands. Days passed, and the once chaotic hospital lobby returned to its usual calm rhythm. But one new presence had become impossible to ignore: the golden puppy. He followed Dr. Emily everywhere she went, padding softly down the hallways, sitting patiently outside every room she entered, and curling up near the nursery window as if he somehow understood his purpose wasn't finished yet. The staff had started calling him Lucky, though Emily quietly thought Guardian suited him better. He wasn't just a visitor anymore, he was family. The nurses brought him water bowls. The janitor snuck him bits of biscuits, and the pediatric patients giggled whenever he wagged his tail their way. Yet every evening he always returned to the same spot beside the baby's crib. Emily often found herself pausing to watch him. There was something extraordinary about how he behaved. When the baby stirred, Lucky's ears perked up instantly. When she whimpered in her sleep, he let out a low, comforting whine, and strangely she would calm. "You really are her protector," Emily whispered one night, crouching beside him. He blinked up at her, eyes glimmering in the soft hospital light. That night, as the ward quieted, Emily sat beside the incubator with Lucky at her feet. The baby's tiny hand twitched in her sleep, and Emily felt a deep tug in her chest, a mixture of exhaustion and wonder. "You brought her here when no one else could," she murmured. "You saved her life, and maybe mine too." Lucky rested his head against her shoe, closing his eyes. Emily smiled, tears filling her own. For all her years in medicine, she had never seen a rescue so pure, so instinctive, so selfless. In that silent moment, surrounded by the faint hum of machines, Emily realized fate had not just brought a child into her care. It had brought her a reminder of compassion, loyalty, and the mysterious power of love that even a small, muddy puppy could carry in his heart. Rain lashed against the cracked pavement of a narrow alleyway, painting the night in silver streaks. A faint whimper cut through the storm. Not from a baby, but from the small golden puppy huddled beneath a piece of cardboard, his fur soaked to the bone. Beside him, a young woman lay slumped against the cold brick wall, her breathing shallow, her arms trembling as she clutched her swollen belly. Her clothes were torn, her lips pale. She was alone, except for the loyal creature pressed against her leg. "Hold on, please," she whispered weakly, one hand gripping her stomach as another contraction hit. Her cry was lost beneath the thunder. The puppy whined, licking her hand, his small body shaking from the cold. He didn't understand what was happening, only that the woman he loved was in pain. Hours passed in agony. Finally, through sheer will, the woman brought a fragile newborn into the world. The baby's cry mingled with the rain, soft and fleeting. Tears streamed down the mother's cheeks as she held the tiny bundle close. "You're so beautiful," she whispered, voice breaking. "But I can't protect you out here." She looked at the puppy, whose eyes glistened with fear and loyalty. "You have to help me," she said, her voice barely a breath. She tore a strip from her shirt, wrapped the baby carefully, and placed her inside a small black bag she'd found beside a dumpster. The puppy whimpered in protest, but she stroked his head gently. "Find help, please. Save her." With trembling fingers, she scrawled a note on a damp scrap of paper and tucked it beside the baby. Then she tied the bag's strap loosely around the puppy's mouth. He hesitated, looking back at her, eyes wide, heart torn, before finally stepping into the rain. The woman slumped against the wall, watching him disappear into the darkness. "Good boy," she whispered faintly before her eyes fluttered shut. Somewhere down the street, headlights flashed as the small golden puppy dragged the black bag through the storm, guided not by sight or scent, but by love. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the city streets glistening beneath the first light of dawn. While Dr. Emily fed the baby her first formula bottle, Officer Mark returned with urgent news. "We found her," he said, voice low but edged with disbelief. "The mother, about 2 blocks from where the puppy was first spotted." Emily's heart jumped. "Is she alive?" "Barely," Mark replied. "She must have collapsed right after sending the dog off. Paramedics got to her in time." Moments later, the hospital doors swung open again, the same doors where the puppy had entered days earlier. This time it was the mother on a stretcher, her face pale and fragile beneath a thin blanket. Her hair clung to her temples and her hands were scraped raw. The little golden puppy perked up instantly, tail wagging weakly as he barked in recognition. Emily's throat tightened. "It's her," she whispered. She followed as the paramedics wheeled the woman into a room beside the nursery. Machines hummed to life and nurses worked quickly to stabilize her. "She's dehydrated, malnourished, and in severe shock," one of them reported. Emily stood by the bedside, watching the faint rise and fall of the woman's chest. "She risked everything," she murmured, "just to make sure her baby lived." From the doorway, the puppy whined softly, refusing to leave. Emily smiled faintly and motioned for him to come closer. He padded to the bedside, sniffing her hand gently before curling up against the foot of the bed, eyes half-lidded but alert, as if guarding both lives he'd sworn to protect. When the mother stirred faintly, her lips parting for breath. Emily leaned closer and said softly, "You're safe now. Your baby made it, thanks to him." A single tear rolled down the woman's cheek, and though she was too weak to speak, her trembling hand reached toward the sound of the puppy's soft whimper, a silent thank you to the loyal friend who had carried her last hope through the storm. Days that followed were filled with cautious hope. The young mother remained in recovery, still weak but stable, while her baby continued to grow stronger in the nursery. Every morning, Dr. Emily made her rounds, and every morning the little golden puppy, now officially called Lucky, walked faithfully beside her. He had become a silent guardian, moving between the mother's room and the baby's crib as if he understood their bond was not yet whole. One quiet afternoon, Emily entered the mother's room carrying a small bundle in her arms. Sunlight poured through the window, painting the walls in a soft glow. The mother sat up slowly, pale but alert, her trembling hands clutching the blanket. Her eyes widened when she saw what Emily was holding. "Is that—" Her voice broke. Emily smiled gently and nodded. "She's safe. She's been waiting for you." Tears filled the mother's eyes as Emily placed the tiny baby in her arms. The moment their skin touched, the woman let out a soft sob, pressing her lips against her child's forehead. "My baby," she whispered. "I thought I lost you." The baby stirred, a faint sound escaping her lips as if recognizing her mother's voice. At the foot of the bed, Lucky lifted his head. His tail gave a small wag before he carefully climbed closer, resting his chin on the mattress. The mother looked down, her eyes shimmering. You saved her, didn't you?" she whispered. Her trembling fingers brushed his damp fur. "You're my hero," Lucky responded with a gentle lick on her hand, then looked up at Emily, who smiled through tears. "He carried her all the way here," Emily said softly. "He never gave up." The room was quiet except for the baby's tiny coos and the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. For the first time, mother, child, and the little rescuer were together, bound forever by courage, love, and a miracle born from a stormy night. News of the miraculous rescue spread quickly through St. Mary's Hospital. Nurses whispered about it in the hallways. Patients asked to see the hero dog. And soon every corner of the building buzzed with warmth instead of worry. Dr. Emily watched it all unfold with quiet pride. The story of the little puppy who carried a baby through the storm had touched everyone's heart and reminded them that hope sometimes arrives on four muddy paws. The hospital board decided to honor Lucky's bravery in a special way. That afternoon, staff and patients gathered in the main lobby, the very place where the puppy had first stumbled in, dragging that black bag behind him. A small podium stood in front of the glass doors, decorated with flowers and a hand-painted sign that read, "Thank you, Lucky." Emily stood at the front, holding the baby in her arms. The mother, still frail but smiling, sat nearby in a wheelchair. When Lucky trotted into the room, the crowd erupted in applause. He paused for a moment, ears perked, tail wagging shyly, as if unsure what all the attention was for. Emily knelt beside him, her voice trembling with emotion. "You saved 2 lives that day," she said softly, "and reminded us all what real courage looks like." A nurse placed a small collar around Lucky's neck, a golden tag engraved with the words "Hope Bringer." The audience clapped again, some wiping tears. The puppy barked once, tail wagging faster, his eyes bright with joy. From that day on, Lucky became the hospital's official therapy dog, visiting children's wards and comforting patients with his gentle spirit. Wherever he walked, smiles followed, proof that miracles could come from even the smallest hearts. Weeks later, the hospital was quieter. The storms had passed, both outside and within. The young mother was finally strong enough to leave, her baby wrapped snugly in a soft pink blanket. Dr. Emily walked beside her toward the front doors, while Lucky trotted proudly at their side, tail wagging with every step. The mother paused at the exit, turning back to the staff who had gathered to see her off. "Thank you," she said softly, tears shining in her eyes, "for saving my baby, and for believing in him." Emily smiled, glancing down at the golden puppy. "We should be thanking him," she replied warmly. "He's the reason both of you are standing here today." The mother bent down and stroked Lucky's head gently. "You'll always be our angel," she whispered. The puppy leaned into her touch, closing his eyes as if he understood every word. Then he gave a playful bark, earning a few laughs from the nurses nearby. As they stepped out into the golden afternoon light, a gentle breeze swept through the lobby, the same doorway where it had all begun. Emily looked up and saw a new plaque mounted on the wall beside the entrance. It read, "In honor of Lucky, the puppy who carried life in a black bag."